I set out with Michael and Jason on a chilly Edinburgh night to tag the walls of Greyfriars Cemetery. We planned a quick night of graffiti, confident in our ability to bypass any security. The idea was simple: enter, mark our territory, and leave without incident. We knew the place had a reputation, but excitement pushed us forward. We parked a few blocks away and walked to a side gate we believed was rarely locked. The empty streets and cool air felt more like a challenge than a warning. We carried our spray cans with a sense of daring that made every step feel like an adventure. The plan was straightforward, and nothing could ruin our fun. The gate yielded easily to our efforts, and we slipped in silently. The graveyard's paths were lined with weathered tombstones and crumbling walls. We made our way to a spot that promised the perfect canvas for our art. Our focus was on the work ahead, undeterred by the cemetery's eerie reputation. Once we settled near an old wall, the quiet of the night enveloped us. The atmosphere was heavier than expected, and every step echoed as a reminder that we were not alone. The night was about to take a darker turn. Jason wandered a short distance to explore another section of the wall. I warned him that staying might invite trouble, but he brushed off my concern. His careless move set off a chain of events that none of us could have anticipated. The air around us suddenly felt charged. Then, a faint noise drifted from the deeper parts of the cemetery. It was like a slow hum. We all knew that something was wrong. While we continued our work, a small figure emerged near an old tombstone. It looked like a young girl, oddly out of place among the relics of death. I immediately felt that getting too close was a mistake. The figure's presence marked the moment when our simple act of rebellion turned into a dangerous game. I moved toward the figure, driven by a need to understand rather than fear. Michael called for caution, but I advanced regardless. The girl stood silently beside a weathered stone, her eyes fixed ahead with an unnerving calm. Every step felt heavier as I approached. Jason, who had been a step behind, suddenly cried out. I saw him stagger back when the girl's gaze locked onto him. In seconds, he collapsed onto the cold ground without warning. The sound of his body hitting the stone echoed in the stillness. Panic overtook our plans. Michael wanted to help, but I grabbed Jason and pulled him away. The girl remained still, her face unreadable, as if she belonged to another time. Our instincts screamed that we should leave, yet confusion rooted us to the spot. The encounter had changed everything. Without a word, we abandoned our graffiti mission and fled down a narrow path. The encounter left a scar, and every step forward felt like stepping deeper into a trap. We had disturbed something that was not meant to be disturbed. We raced through a narrow corridor lined with crumbling headstones. Every step was punctuated by the sound of heavy footsteps behind us. The presence that followed moved with deliberate intent. We tried splitting up briefly, hoping to confuse the force stalking us, but the plan backfired. The danger closed in relentlessly. In one narrow passage, Michael's voice sounded as he dodged obstacles and urged me to keep moving. The maze of tombstones and debris became a battleground where survival depended on every quick decision. Fear and determination merged in our frantic escape. I almost lost sight of Michael in the chaos, and each step felt like an eternity. The relentless pursuit left no room for error. We were in a dangerous game of cat and mouse, and the entity was winning. Every twist in the labyrinth of graves intensified the hunt. I stumbled upon uneven cobblestones, forcing me to scramble up as the sound of pursuing steps grew louder. The pressure was constant. Every breath was like a battle against the cold fear creeping into my bones. I pushed forward, ignoring the pain and exhaustion, driven solely by the need to survive. In a particularly tight archway, I nearly came face to face with the entity. Its form was unmistakable, a twisted mix of youthful innocence and ancient menace. I barely dodged its grasp. The encounter, a stark reminder of the danger that lurked in every shadow. The chase was unrelenting and unforgiving. I managed to break free by thrusting my shoulder against a crumbling wall, creating a gap just enough to escape its clutches. The creature's presence lingered at the edge of my vision, its intent clear. I ran hard, every step carrying me further from the terror that had nearly claimed my life. I reached a broken wall that promised a way out into a narrow alley. Michael's distant shouts were the only sign of life as I hesitated only a moment before making a break for it. The creature followed, its movements fluid and determined. There was no chance to hide. I had to confront the situation head on. The spirit intercepted me at the wall, forcing a struggle in the tight space. I fought to push past, using the rough edge of the stone as leverage. In that brief, intense struggle, I caught a glimpse of a face that was both haunting and unforgiving. Drawing on every ounce of strength, I shoved past the spirit and sprinted into the alley. The cold determination that had saved me that night was all that mattered. Michael's survival on another route was a relief, though the loss of Jason was a burden I would carry forever. The threat receded as I put distance between us and the cemetery. The encounter left scars, and the weight of the night's terror pressed down on me with every step. The spirit's presence faded into the darkness, but its impact was impossible to forget. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of the horror that had unfolded at Greyfriars. Michael and I managed to rebuild our lives, but the memory of that night was a constant shadow. I recorded every detail in a journal, each line a reminder of a mistake we could never undo. The loss of Jason haunted every page. I revisited the outskirts of the cemetery alone, searching for clues that might explain what we encountered. The investigation only deepened my unease. After that, Michael became quieter, lost in thought, while I wrestled with guilt and the stark reality of our encounter. The cemetery had taken more than a night of vandalism. It had taken a piece of our innocence. The memory of that relentless pursuit was etched into every corner of my mind. Now, every time I pass near Greyfriars, I remember the terror of that night. The place stands as a stark warning. Some secrets are best left undisturbed. The dark legacy of that encounter lives on, a grim reminder that not every rebellious act ends without consequence. This story is based on the terrifying legacy of Bloody Mackenzie, one of Scotland's most infamous ghosts. Sir George Mackenzie, a ruthless 17th century lawyer, was responsible for the brutal persecution and execution of thousands of Covenanters, Scottish Presbyterians who defied the king's authority. After his death, he was buried in the Black Mausoleum within Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh. But his spirit did not rest. Visitors who dared approach his tomb reported sudden scratches, bruises, and even fainting spells. Some claimed to hear heavy footsteps following them, while others described an invisible force pushing or choking them. The mausoleum itself became a focal point of paranormal activity, earning its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the world. However, not all spirits in Greyfriars are as passive as wandering shadows. Many believe that Mackenzie is not alone. The graveyard is said to be haunted by other restless souls, some of them far more aggressive. Paranormal investigators have documented unexplainable cold spots, disturbing growls, and even poltergeist-like activity in the vicinity of the tomb.
I work as the caretaker of Highgate Cemetery in London. Every night I walk these grounds with a steady pace, ensuring everything stays in order. I know every path, tomb, and stone by heart. This job is about routine and responsibility, not mystery or superstition. The cemetery has its share of rumors. I'm talking about ghosts, occult rituals, and even tales of a vampire. I stick to the facts. I fix what needs fixing, clear debris, and keep the grounds safe. I don't buy into urban legends, even if some locals enjoy embellishing the truth. I've never been one for theatrics. My focus is on the practical side of things. Maintenance and security. I trust my experience over hearsay. Every night is just another shift. Or at least it was. Until tonight made me reconsider that mindset. I set out with a clear head and purpose. Routine was all I expected. But as the evening deepened, An unusual presence began to disturb the calm of my rounds. During a routine check near the perimeter, I noticed a man wandering off the beaten track. He moved slowly and deliberately, an oddity in a place where every visitor usually knew their direction. Instead of immediately calling the police, I decided to watch him from a distance. He looked unkempt, wearing a worn-out coat with a scruffy beard, and he avoided direct eye contact. His behavior wasn't aggressive at first, but something about his gait and silence made me wary. I followed him carefully, not wanting to escalate the situation before understanding it. I approached him calmly, asking what he was doing there. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet inquiry meant to determine whether he needed help or was up to no good. The night was cold, and the space between tombs amplified every sound, yet I kept my tone steady and practical. He mumbled vague answers and avoided any clear explanation. His body language was tense, and instead of waiting for backup, I decided to handle the situation on my own. I didn't feel fear. I felt duty. I stepped forward, instructing him to explain himself. Without warning, he lunged at me. It was clear then that he wasn't just some confused wanderer. In a split second, he grabbed me. I struggled to fend him off, my actions driven solely by instinct. The attack was unfiltered and raw. He swung wildly, but I managed to land a few defensive blows. His strength was surprising for someone who looked so weak. I reacted as best as I could, but his actions escalated faster than I could calculate. He broke through my guard and closed in. Suddenly, his hands reached for my neck, and I found myself fighting to block his brutal assault. I realized I had to subdue him before he could cause any more harm. Not just to me, but to anyone who might wander these grounds later. Every move was measured and harsh. I grabbed at him with a single goal, to stop him from hurting anyone else. The struggle was intense, and in that moment, the cemetery transformed from a place of routine into a stage for violent confrontation. He broke free and charged once more. And that's when I felt his teeth sink into my arm. The bite was savage, ripping through skin with no hesitation. I staggered back in pain and shock. The injury was deep. I fought the urge to collapse, struggling to regain control of the situation while adrenaline kept me going. I swung my arms in a desperate effort to push him away, every move punctuated by the searing pain of his assault. In that exact moment, he just disappeared. This didn't mean he ran away. No, I didn't even hear him running. He was close by, stalking me. At any moment, he was going to attack me, and I had to be ready for him. Not long after, I saw him hiding behind an old tombstone. His eyes were wide and unblinking, yet he made no immediate move to attack. Instead, he retreated into the maze of gravestones, almost as if he expected someone to join in the chaos. I followed, intent on cornering him. I moved carefully, scanning every narrow alley between the graves. The silence of the night was now punctuated by my labored breathing and the distant static of a police radio. I tracked him with deliberate steps, every sense on high alert. Each time I thought I had him in sight, he vanished into another row of stones or behind a weathered monument. The pursuit became a tense game of cat and mouse, and every moment was filled with the possibility of another savage encounter. The urgency grew as the night dragged on. I barricaded a few entrances and continued guiding the police with my intimate knowledge of the grounds. Their sirens were getting closer, adding a grim soundtrack to the pursuit. I kept working inside, knowing that my efforts might finally lead to an end. Near an old mausoleum, a commotion signaled that he was trapped. I arrived to see him isolated and cornered by officers. In a matter of moments, the fight that had dominated the night came to a sudden close. The police subdued him with force, ending his rampage in a matter-of-fact takedown. They dragged him away as I watched, his expression vacant under the harsh lights. The authorities later identified him as a man who had escaped from a mental institution and thought he was a vampire. A dangerous individual who used his deranged energy to terrorize Highgate. The details of his capture were stark and left no doubt about his violent potential. After that long night, I spent the early hours cleaning up and checking the damage. The cemetery, normally so orderly, showed signs of violence that would not easily fade. Every disturbed grave and stained stone reminded me that routine can shatter in an instant. I documented every detail for the police and tended to my wounds. By dawn, the cemetery settled back into silence. The police had taken the attacker away, and order was slowly returning. My role as caretaker had become more than just a job. It was a commitment. I continue my work with the understanding that every night brings its own challenges. The brutal events of that night are now part of the story I live with, a raw reminder that the unexpected can happen at any moment, and despite the scars, I stand ready for whatever might come next. The story is based on the chilling legends of Highgate Cemetery in London, a place long associated with paranormal encounters and strange occurrences. While some visitors report ghostly apparitions, including a mysterious woman in white and shadowy figures that vanish without a trace, the most infamous tale involves a so-called vampire. In the 1970s, rumors spread of a tall, dark entity with glowing red eyes lurking among the tombstones. Reports of eerie whispers, sudden temperature drops, and even sightings of animals found mysteriously drained of blood fueled speculation that something unnatural resided in the cemetery. However, no concrete evidence ever confirmed the existence of such a being, leaving the story to blur the line between folklore and hysteria. Beyond the ghostly sightings, Highgate Cemetery also became a gathering place for individuals fascinated by the occult. Some claim that secret rituals have taken place among the graves, with symbols of unknown origin discovered near disturbed tombs. Others believe that the vampire legend attracted those who either imitate vampires or genuinely believe themselves to be creatures of the night, adding another layer of mystery to the site. Whether the eerie events stem from paranormal forces, human imagination, or something in between, Highgate remains one of London's most enigmatic and unsettling locations.
I work as a doctor at the Morgue in Quilmes, Argentina. You may not know what happened here, but let me tell you something. Nobody could have ever prepared me for that. I was at the hospital when a man in a wheelchair arrived with a covered body. The routine of our work was shattered by his presence and the grim case he brought. I took note of every detail, knowing that nothing happened before. The hospital corridors were unusually silent as staff avoided eye contact with the stranger. Most of them urged me not to ask questions, but I found it impossible to ignore the oddity of his behavior. My duty was clear, yet my gut told me there was more behind the delivery. I kept my tone direct and my questions focused, determined to get answers. The man's eyes held a strange intensity as he allowed himself to be guided by the security staff. His hands clutched the wheelchair's arms with a desperate grip. I watched him from a distance, processing the fact that he was not like the other mourners or family members we occasionally saw. I maintained my professional distance, even as unease crept in. There was an unspoken people. While everyone remained silent, I decided to question him discreetly. The instinct to probe further would soon put me in direct conflict with events that no one could have anticipated. The man entered the morgue with a covered body that he insisted was his mother. The corpse, wrapped hastily in a sheet, looked out of place among our usual cases. I recognized the details that no one else seemed to notice, a detail in the way the sheet concealed more than it revealed. I was the only one who dared to question the explanation provided. I asked him direct questions about how and where he had kept her. He responded with curt, disjointed answers that made little sense. While most staff avoided his gaze and quickly retreated, I pressed on with my inquiry. It was clear to me that something was off with the timeline and his behavior. A murmur passed among the team, Some recalled that the body of my own mother had been missing from the morgue for several days. I listened as colleagues exchanged worried glances. The man's story was the only explanation for the unusual absence of a body that should have been accounted for. My curiosity mixed with professional duty as I sought more evidence. His tone grew more erratic with every answer provided. The questions I raised were met with silence or abrupt statements, hinting at a secret he was unwilling to share. The tension in the room was mounting, and I could feel that the situation was spiraling beyond simple confusion. The true horror was only beginning. Without warning, the man's demeanor shifted. His calm responses turned into aggressive gestures as he glared at me. He suddenly attacked me, knocking aside equipment and forcing everyone to scramble for cover. I dodged his clumsy blows while trying to maintain a clear mind. My training as a doctor had never prepared me for physical assault by someone who should have been under control. After trying to attack me, the man managed to break free from the hospital confines and sped towards the nearby cemetery of Espeleta. I pursued him despite my colleagues urging me to step back. I knew the importance of catching him before he could cause more harm. I shouted for someone to call the police while running after him. The graveyard was dimly lit and sparsely occupied, but I caught a glimpse of a small group in the distance. Their presence, unexpected and unexplained, made the situation even more complicated. I warned them with loud shouts to alert the authorities. I sprinted through narrow paths between tombstones and mausoleums, my focus solely on tracking him down. The thought that he might harm someone else or, worse, was just too strong to ignore. I caught up with him near a cluster of old graves when he suddenly intercepted my path. Out of a side alley he emerged wielding a large, heavy stone. The stone glinted under the sparse cemetery lighting as he prepared to strike. I managed to block the swing, but the force of his attack was overwhelming. We engaged in a fierce physical struggle on the ground. Despite my resistance, he seemed to have an edge. At one point I managed to push him off balance, even if only for a split second. But he recovered quickly and pressed his advantage. I desperately shouted for help, but my voice was drowned out by the chaos of our struggle. In that moment, it felt as if every second was stretched. The fight reached a critical moment as he raised the stone again, ready to deliver what I feared would be a fatal blow. Suddenly, I heard a firm shout from behind. A man from the distant family I had seen earlier sprinted into the fray. Together we managed to push the attacker back, just enough to buy time. The attacker, driven by his own twisted logic, continued to fight until we pinned him down on the uneven ground. We managed to hold him long enough for the sound of approaching sirens to grow louder. Our combined effort finally subdued him, and his wild eyes slowly began to lose their ferocious glint. With the arrival of the police, the immediate threat diminished. The man had not only attacked me, but had also concealed the body of his mother under a sheet. Later, during an investigation at the morgue, I noticed irregularities that confirmed my worst suspicions. I was right. He stayed with his dead mother for days. The police later told me that the man attacked me because he felt pressured by the questions I asked him, and how not to ask them. The man confessed to having spent nights sleeping in the same bed as his mother's corpse. He ate with her, spent days with her, then he had the nerve to bring her here as if it were nothing. Apparently, the mother had died of natural causes, and the man had already had psychopathic features before. Whatever the case may be, I'm happy to never have to see him again, or be near his thoughts for even a second. This story is based on a shocking event that took place in Quilmes, Argentina in 2024, when a man pushed the corpse of an elderly woman in a wheelchair to the morgue of the Espeleta cemetery. The woman had been dead for 3 days, yet the man had kept her body in his home before deciding to transport it himself. Witnesses were horrified as they watched the unsettling scene unfold, with some believing they were witnessing a paranormal event rather than a gruesome reality. The mystery deepened as authorities investigated the man's motivations, questioning whether he had been in denial of her death or if something far more disturbing had influenced his actions. As the case gained attention, eerie rumors began to spread about the deceased woman and her time in the man's home. Later, some locals whispered that strange noises had been heard coming from the house, as if the dead woman had never truly left.